I would like to introduce the eminent personality and today's program speaker, Dr. Ihtisham Janbat, Assistant Professor, expert on current affairs and Pakistan affairs, mentor of CSS and PMS, Mr. Ihtisham Janbat, Assistant Professor. Ji, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for this honor for inviting me. And I have turned your speaker off because it will be more convenient for me to deliver a lecture. This lecture is also being recorded on my part, so I will deliver the recording link after the lecture to the honorable host. My name is Ihtisham Janbat, and I try to teach, and I don't know whether I teach good or not. Anyways, I've been requested by Dr. Abdul Qadir Mushtaq, Chairman, Department of Pakistan Studies in Government College University, Faisalabad, to deliver a lecture on this very important topic, electronic media's role in Pakistan's foreign policy decision making. And it's a very bold step on the part of Department of Pakistan Studies to conduct this lecture and to highlight as well as raise an academic voice, because the aspects we're going to discuss today will pose a serious question, and it will raise serious question pertaining to why not our electronic media it's miserably, or you can say that unable to come up with a solid impact as far as foreign policy decision making is concerned. Before going into the details of this short lecture, the participants must realize that what really it is meant by electronic media. Generally, when we perceive that what is electronic media, the very first thing, since we are in 21st century and it's an age of 3G and 4G and 5G at our doorstep, so we generally perceive that when we talk about electronic media as if we are referring to social media. No, it's not the case. So first and foremost, all participants must understand and must keep this thing in mind that when we talk about electronic media, so basically electronic media as defined by Monica Pena. Monica Pena's book, News, Media, and Foreign Policy Decision Making Process, is a very famous book. It was published in 2003. So Monica Pena defines electronic media that use of mediums like video recording, audio recording, multimedia presentation, slide presentation, DVDs, CDs, live broadcast, online content, they all they fall in the sphere of electronic media. But electronic media uses two different mediums. One medium is known as old media, OLD, old media. And the other medium is known as new media, NEW, new media. So electronic media is categorized into two sub-medias, you can say. So the mediums which electronic media uses, old media and new media. And what is old media? Old media is your television, radio, of course, television news channels as well. So that's the old media. It is very important to keep this division in mind, because when we will analyze the role of electronic media in Pakistan, so basically we are analyzing two different mediums, the old media and the new media. So it is very important to keep it in mind at the outset. As far as the new media is concerned, so here falls that social media, and then online networking like Facebook, Twitter, blah blah. So this initial understanding is a must when we are trying to address an issue or trying to think theoretically on a topic, role of electronic media in foreign policy decision making. So what really we are referring to when we say electronic media? So first and foremost, I hope that all participants are very much clear about what is meant by electronic media. It's old media and the new media. We will analyze the both and their role in foreign policy decision making, whether is there any role or not. Now, the second part, and of course, we have to discuss the role of old and new media in foreign policy decision making. Now, second part of this topic is what is meant by foreign policy decision making. Foreign policy decision making is basically a topic within the domain of foreign policy analysis. And foreign policy analysis is a sub-discipline of international relations. So international relations is the main umbrella discipline in which there is a sub-discipline known as foreign policy analysis. And within foreign policy analysis, we discuss about foreign policy decision making. Now, what really decision making is, foreign policy decision making? So as far as foreign policy decision making is concerned, then the best source on this particular topic is Richard Snyder. The book name is also Foreign Policy Decision Making Revisited. Foreign Policy Decision Making Revisited. Jack Snyder. Sorry, Richard Snyder. So he came up with two definitions of foreign policy decision making, and it's again very much it is essential for all participants to understand this. He says that foreign policy decision making refers to the choices. It refers to the choices states make, and ultimately those choices which state make that affects a national action at the international stage. So we can say that, yes, in a very layman context, that foreign policy decision making is about the study of choices on the part of state. It's one aspect, yes, it is. But foreign policy decision making also seeks to understand how states formulate foreign policy. The one aspect is that it is the study of the choices which state make. And the second aspect is that foreign policy decision making is also, it seeks to understand that how states formulate foreign policy. How states formulate foreign policy. There are different models in foreign policy analysis, and in this particular topic, within the domain of international relations, there are different models. In today's lecture, we are not going in detail of those models, but suffices to say here that these models are rational actor model. Rational actor model. Rational actor model pertains to that a state evaluates its cost and benefits pertaining to a decision making, maximum utility of an action, states analyze it, okay, fine. Then there is a bureaucratic model. In a bureaucratic model, different bureaucracies within a state, State Department, Defense Department, Foreign Office, stuff like that. They came up with their own settings of goals and their agendas, and they present their case to the executive, I mean to say president or prime minister. And then one bureaucracy dominates other, and their choice and or their decision is approved. So such a case is known as, just a brief introduction. So then institutional politics. Institutional politics as a model of decision making whereby states on certain low ranked issues, they have developed certain SOPs, standard operating procedures. So state would follow that course in relatively low ranked issues. Then there is an important one, that is syncretic, idiosyncrasies, we know it very well, idiosyncrasies, whereby the will of an individual leader, a person, that dominates the whole foreign policy decision-making process. Like Truman Doctrine, like Hitler's decision to launch war against Russia in World War II, stuff like that. So idiosyncratic model, in 21st century, once again, we are witnessing a rebirth of idiosyncratic model in the form of analyzing foreign policy of Russia through the, by understanding or by reading the mind of Putin, Xi Jinping, Trump, Biden, Erdogan, Imran Khan, Modi. So idiosyncrasy is once again witnessing a rebirth or a revival in the discipline of international relations. Then there is an elitist model whereby a certain dominant elite in a state, that dominant elite, either that may be political or apolitical, you must be very, you can understand it, that what is meant by apolitical when you say in the case of Pakistan. So elitist model, a learned elite, either political or apolitical, they make their choices, and subsequently public opinion is associated with that particular choice. And another last one is populist model. Populist model of in decision making, foreign policy decision making, refers to just like the way we are witnessing nowadays in the form of violent protest by a party, and you know it well, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan. They want their conception or their choice to be incorporated in foreign policy of Pakistan, expelling the French ambassador and stuff like that, boycotting French products, blah blah blah. So the most dangerous of the models is populist model. Nevertheless, so this is the basic understanding that what is electronic media we are going to analyze and what is really meant by decision making. Now we will start with that what really it is, that how electronic media plays a role. But before analyzing it, an author, Alex Mintz, M-I-N-T-Z, Alex Mintz wrote a book known as Understanding Foreign Policy Decision Making. And in that book, he categorized different determinants of foreign policy decision making: the international environment factor, international factor, environment of the decision factor, international factor, domestic factor, cultural factors. So he highlighted different determinants of foreign policy decision making. And in the last chapter, where he writes about the role of media, that can media influence foreign policy decision making? Is it so powerful that media, and we are referring to electronic media definitely, that can media, it can make any influence to shape foreign policy, or if not to shape foreign policy, at least to come up with as a pressure tool, as a pressure group during the process of foreign policy decision making. Can it really so? So in this context, Alex Mintz came up with two theories. There are two theories which he highlighted in his book, that and he came up with the conclusion that yes, up to some extent, media, electronic media, is influential as far as foreign policy decision making of a state is concerned. So he came up with two theories, and one theory is popularly known as, and we all know about it generally, going to the social media impact, this particular word have been read, mentioned a number of times, and we know it, that the CNN effect. The first theory, which he highlighted, is the CNN effect. The CNN effect, although CNN is a news channel, but it has transcended, this very much phrase had transcended into a theory that how electronic media can shape and reshape foreign policy decision making. Particularly, CNN is concerned, the CNN became household. It gained currency in context of foreign policy decision making in 1991, when United States was involved in First Persian War, also known as First Gulf War, also known as US-Iraq War, 1991. So that was the first time that CNN came into limelight. And the way CNN created that public opinion among Americans. So definitely it played a very influential role. But then the author also highlighted another important aspect, that is the CNN curve, C-U-R-V, curve, the CNN curve. So basically, in this theory of the CNN effect, the most important thing is CNN curve. And that's very important aspect, that how electronic media plays an important role in foreign policy decision making. As far as the theory of CNN effect, with the jargon of CNN curve, the CNN curve says that I would like to give an example in this case, so that the participants must understand very much clearly that what is really meant by CNN curve. The CNN curve means that it was the electronic media which showed such a pathetic, miserable, inhumane, and crisis-ridden Somalia, whereby starvation was prevalent over there, human rights abuses were there. So United States must play a responsible role. So it was initially the electronic media which created that environment. And not to forget that United States government was also on board for creating this public opinion. So the very first aspect of CNN curve, that media creates that environment whereby it is easy for a state to come up with an interventionist, policy. Okay, fine, one aspect. But when Americans were in trouble in Somalia, so it was again this electronic media that portrayed the sacrifices and the conditions of American troops, the miserable condition of American troops, and that compelled American government to withdraw from Somalia, the CNN curve. So definitely, Alexander Mentz justified this thing that electronic media, one way or the other, that plays an important role in foreign policy decision making. You must be very, very much active and clear about this thing, that we are not going to prove this case that electronic media is playing a very vibrant role in Pakistan. But first of all, we are highlighting different theorizations. The second theory which Alexander Mentz highlights was manufacturing consent thesis. Manufacturing consent thesis. So this second theory of manufacturing consent thesis, it says that elite dominates media as well as government in any country. So the elite controls media as well as government. And the elite, inverted bracket, you can say political or apolitical, So the elite controls media and, government. And they use media to create support for policies. And there are two ways in this regard, that how elite manufacture a consent, how elite manufacture a consent in a country. So Alexander Mans highlighted two ways for this. One is the executive version. The executive version. Of course, you can say that it's a version of government, any sitting government. The executive version, VERSIUN version. And the second one is the elite version, VERSIUN version, the elite version. But sometimes it happens that executive version can, or maybe it can collide with elite version. It may collide. Executive version says, I would follow policy XYZ, and the elite version says, no, it is not in the interest of the state to follow XYZ. Rather, we have to follow WXYZ. So in that case, elite version, since elite dominates media or control media, so the executive version is cornered and elite version dominates. Take the example of Iraq War, 2003, whereby it was not the executive version. Even United States Senate initially was reluctant on the invasion of Iraq, but the elite version dominated. So in this case, Alexander Ments amply justifies that, yes, electronic media plays a vital role in decision making. But the problem is, sir, that this whole narrative which we have discussed, it largely applies on developed countries. Such a narrative of CNN curve, CNN effect, manufacturing consent, largely we would come across that these theoretical frameworks justifies the role of electronic media in foreign policy decision making, largely in developed world. But what about developing world? Since Pakistan is part of developing world. So what about developing world? Does media really plays a vital role in foreign policy decision making in developing countries? So let us have another case study. The author name is Abdul Latif Adan, ADAN, Adan. Abdul Latif Adan. Abdul Latif Adan came up with a very interesting thesis. He analyzed or comparatively analyzed the role of media in Kenya and in Great Britain. So his research article, it is available online. Abdul Latif Adan, a role of influence of media on foreign policy decision making, a comparative analysis of Kenya and Great Britain. So in this research paper, Abdul Latif Adan came up with the conclusion that since in Great Britain, media outlets are free, they are privatized. So one cannot witness the manipulation of government on electronic media. So that's why they are playing an important role in foreign policy decision making in Great Britain. So since they are privatized, that's why they are free. And in the case of Kenya, since Kenya has no privatized news channels, so therefore one can witness a manipulation on the part of government in Kenya. And from that particular conclusion, he make it a generalization that in developing countries, owing to the manipulation of governments, electronic media is incapable of playing a role in foreign policy decision making. Very important aspect that initially we discussed about Alexander Ments and the others, that in developed world, yes, electronic media plays an important role. But when we study Abdul Latif Adan's research paper, so he says no, because media is more privatized in developed world and not in the case of developing countries. But when I'm very much thankful to administration of Government College University, Faisalabad, and especially Dr. Abdul Qadir Mushtaq, that they choose this topic, because from here, what we're going to discuss is very interesting aspect. See, in the case of Pakistan, we have 36 news channels, and I'm not talking about entertainment channels. I'm talking about news channels. Till last night, there were 36. I don't know whether we will come across anyone new or less. Anyways, there are 36 news channels in Pakistan, privatized, with the exception of 1 or 2 state-owned. All are privatized. More than 100 channels, electronic media channels. So it means that if we apply Abdul Latif Adan thesis on Pakistan, so he says that in developing world, if media is not privatized, so it won't help in foreign policy decision making. But in the case of Pakistan, 36 news channels, a couple of government-owned channels, and rest of the news channels are privatized channels. So it means that in Pakistan, electronic media would definitely be playing a constructive and influential role. But no, sir, it's not the case. Pakistan is such an interesting, case study, that in the case of Pakistan, you will not come across any role of electronic media as far as foreign policy decision making is concerned. And now we have, this is a big statement, it's a very big statement. So we have to prove it, that how come electronic media. And not to forget, we will discuss 2 aspects in this regard, the old media and the new media. So we'll discuss both the aspects. So Abdul Latif Adan says, if media is privatized, then it is free in the case of Great Britain. But in the case of Pakistan, media is privatized. There are 36 news channels, but are they free? So it is very much clear that the research of Alexander Mentz as well as research of Abdul Latif Adan, both, they are not capable enough to justify or to analyze the role of electronic media and foreign policy decision making in the case of Pakistan. So now we have to contextualize the role of media. I hope very much all participants are very much clear about the theme which I have discussed, and now we will specifically apply that theme in the case of Pakistan, the role of old media in foreign policy decision making and the role of new media in foreign policy decision making. I hope that we are all on the same page. So let us first try to analyze the role of old media, because initially we have already cleared this thing that electronic media can be divided into 2 mediums, old media and the new media. So let us now analyze that whether the old media has played any significant role in foreign policy decision making or not. So in this context, let us divide this old media, the television, radio, news channels, into 2 categories in order to have a better understanding. First one, I have divided it into pre-2002 era, prior to 2002, because in 2002, Pakistan Electronic Media Regulation Authority was established in 2002. So prior to 2002, from 1947, onwards till 2002. So what was happening in that phase? How the old media in that particular phase, from 47 to 2002, how it has played, or whether it played any role or not. So that was largely an era of Pakistan television. And as far as Pakistan television is concerned, or Pakistan Radio Pakistan, even in 1990s, we have come across certain channels, new electronic channels, but largely they were entertainment-based channels. We witnessed in 1998 the introduction of FM radio stations in Pakistan from 1998. And we know it well that today there are 9 FM radios working across Pakistan. But still, we've divided into 2 categories on the basis of that regulatory act, authority, sorry, which was introduced in 2002, Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority. And prior to that, it was PTV, it was Radio Pakistan, that as an old media, whether they played any role in foreign policy decision making. So I would say absolutely not. The reason so that PTV as an instrument of government, PTV largely in that phase, although they came up with the ideas like current affair programs after the news of 9 p.m. at 9:40, 9:45, we used to come across different current affair programs. But those current affair programs were not, the nature of those programs were not as a sort of advisory panel or an advisory campaign to the government that how to react on certain issues. It's a fast age, and you can easily come across different videos of such programs of 1990s, and they are available on YouTube. And try to listen those programs, try to watch those programs, and it would be a 40-45 minute program. And at the end of the program, there would be no suggestions, advice on the part of panel to the government. Rather, the whole narrative of such program was merely to create an opinion. Whatever the executive version or the elite version have been highlighted, that was, executed. So there was no, although it's a very bold statement, and much more research is required in this particular field, but that's what I believe. I may be wrong, but that's what I believe. And interestingly, in the same pre-2002 era, as we have discussed the role of FM radio stations, these FM radio stations try to create a comparative analysis of the FM radio stations in India and FM radio stations in Pakistan. And you would come across that FM radio stations in India, they discuss different aspects, and even they criticize government, and even multiple FM stations, since we are living in Punjab, and certain FM Punjabi channels, they are very much critical towards Modi administration and its foreign policy. But in the case of Pakistan, you will come across music must have a FM music on hai. So nearly all FM channels in Pakistan, they are generally, they are either they are told to, or they are restricted to, or they have that incapacity to discuss on major important international issues and play a role of an advisory panel or such stuff like that for foreign policy decision making and for government. So music you would come across largely in Pakistan FM radio stations. So this is a very brief structure which I tried to highlight pertaining to the role of old media, and for our convenience, we have divided it from 1947 to 2002. It's a very important phase, and particularly disciplines like international relations, political science, Pakistan studies, and history. These 4 disciplines in Pakistan, they must encourage their students to, to write theses and research articles on this particular phase. Anyways, second phase of this old media is from 2002 onwards. Since old media is very much old media, doesn't mean that it is old, it is gone. It is very much prevalent. It is present, old media. So the growth of old media under a military dictator was witnessed with the introduction of electronic uh, electronic media regulatory authority 2002. So that growth of old media under Musharraf, it was sort of a mushroom growth of media under Musharraf. So it was expected that media is free. They would definitely question the role of Pakistan in war on terror at that time. Media would question different, schemes at that time. Media would highlight that why Shaukat Aziz, when he became prime minister, he would go to Paris Club for the rescheduling of loans, and those loans, although he managed to reschedule, but when we have to pay them back in 2008-9, it was an absolute disaster. So it was expected that yes, such a media would definitely raise questions and discuss about such developments in the economic foreign policy of Pakistan. But no, sir. The media outlets, they did not follow any such course. It is primarily of the reason because such media outlets were new. They don't want to offend government. But I believe that it's not the case. It's the case that immediately after 2002, the media, electronic media outlets, the news channels, which were introduced in Pakistan, they were largely owned by those print media owners, they were following that same cultural practice of not to question foreign policy choices largely. So whatever the culture was there in your print media transcended into electronic media. I believe so. Maybe I'm wrong, but I believe so. So the climate of control which was there in print media, that climate of control prevailed in this new era of mushroom growth of electronic media and news channels. So media, electronic media, in the context of old media has miserably failed. Although still we'll come across certain current affair programs, but again, I would say, as I have said earlier, that those programs are not, the purpose of those programs is not to come up with any suggestive framework or an advisory framework. That is merely just a talkative nonsense, and that's it. Anyways, now we would come towards, there are number of aspects other than this. I have highlighted them. I'm going to say in 2011, when MFN status to India was very much on card, that how media could play an effective role at that time, but media didn't play any role. And then in most recent context, FATF, our people don't know that what are the primary objections FATF has been talking about, and what are those recommendations which Pakistan is not following. One minister says that it is only one recommendation which is a problem. FATF says no, there are 4 recommendations which is the problem. So who can develop a public opinion, or at least if not public opinion, then a sense to understand the relationship with FATF? Of course media, but unfortunately media is not playing that role. You would come across 1 or 2 programs in which after a week or 10 days a specific topic, but with a very controlled content. You would witness like Aaj Shahzeb Khanzada ke saath, a very controlled content, but largely on domestic issues, uh, internal politics. You would come across media, electronic media is playing that role, not on economic foreign policy, not on international obligations, not on the geoeconomics and the geopolitical frameworks and the choices, subsequent choices, but just reporting. And that reporting is also in a controlled context. Now we'll come towards the second medium of electronic media, that is the new media. The new media. The new media, as we have already discussed, that it is about, you can say, quote unquote, it's the social media. As a medium, yes, it is the new media, social media. Social media, in the case of Pakistan, it gained a currency, or it came in limelight, particularly from 2014, when 3G and 4G technology was introduced in Pakistan. Prior to that, social media was not up to that extent a significant player in Pakistan. So from 2014 onwards, one can witness that the very control which we are which have discussed in previous header, that control was challenged, because it is very easy for a dominant elite to control print media, electronic media, but that control gets a challenge in the case of the new media. But not to worry about, as the nature of our argument will not change, because the social media, in the case of Pakistan, it also, one can witness it has never played a significant role in foreign policy decision making. Rather, social media, in case of Pakistan, played an active role in popularizing the idea of post-truth politics, the populist narrative, particularly since 2016 onwards up till now. So our social media, then a very populist tendency can be witnessed in our social media, and bashing each other, blaming each other, the political parties or their workers and the fake accounts, and they are criticizing each other, personal attacks, intolerance. So such a culture which has been prevalent in social media, it never became a, a key instrument for, as far as its role is concerned, for foreign policy decision making. Rather, you can say that there is no space for foreign policy decision making as far as new media, the social media is concerned. And the people who were previously controlling, the this foreign policy decision making aspect of media. I'm not saying that anyone can control each and every aspect of media. I mean, media is very much free in the case of Pakistan, but then it is to contemplate whether how to define what is free. So, anyways, owing to that post-truth politics, owing to that emotional politics, our social media was hijacked, and it became a national security concern as well, in the form of that we have repeatedly highlighted that social media has been used as an instrument or tool of hybrid war. So how to deal with it? Can we control this new media? Yes, one can control it. But you would need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of manpower and labor to check and streamline such content and activities on social networking sites. But that is not part of our topic, because our topic is that role of electronic media in foreign policy decision making, old media and new media. So that's that part, that how to tackle hybrid war, is not part of this particular discussion of today. But still, I would like to highlight one point, that since this hybrid threat, hybrid warfare threat, is a very, it's an asymmetric threat. So for in order to deal with it, restrictions and controlling content is not sufficient. It would never work. You have to come up with asymmetric options, asymmetric deterrents in the case of hybrid. But that's another topic. Now, what to do? That if in the case of Pakistan, as we have uh, developed this argument, that whatever have been happening in developed world, or even in the case of developing countries, like the thesis of Abdul Latif Hadan. So in Pakistan's case is quite different, and its media is privatized, but still no role. Social media, uh, a, a vibrant social media, but that social media is not playing a constructive role in as an advisory framework for foreign policy decision making. So where lies the problem, and how to address that problem? Can we are we capable enough to address this issue? The first and the foremost thing in this context is that democracy. We have to ensure, if not, if we can't ensure full democracy in Pakistan, let us move towards flawed democracy, because even a flawed democracy is better than a hybrid, democracy. So if we contextualize the role of media, electronic media, in foreign policy decision making in even flawed democracies. So they are raising voices. Even in India, where since 2014, a very, a very narrow approach of a narrowed foreign policy approach has been witnessed. If you come across Indian speeches and statements, since 2014, their leaders are not referring to the word India, rather they are referring to the word Bharat. Sushma Swaraj, when she was alive, she used to say that India is the Dhruv Tara, pole star of democracy. So even India is a flawed democracy. It's not up to the mark, that standard democracy. And there, the political elite, they tried to execute a very narrow approach, but still, media raised voice. In the case of a hybrid democracy, I wonder media is not even capable of raising a voice. So let us shift from this hybrid model of democracy to, if not a full democracy, then a flawed democracy. And that's something very, uh, so the first and the foremost thing, for I believe that democracy is a must. Just get rid of hybrid democracy in the case of Pakistan. And the second aspect is that our media must play an important role by introducing discussions over economic foreign policy, territorial conflicts. And yes, I admit that our media houses and they would get very low TRPs when they would start such discussion programs. Instead of this, if they would discuss internal politics, so that would be important. I beg your pardon, ji. Just 1 second. So, ji, so that's what I believe. There are a few other suggestions, but I would like to answer your questions so that it would be a sort of contentment for me that whether my lecture has imparted something in participants or not. And as far as the online participants are concerned, they since they are my they can leave their questions on my WhatsApp number. And जो participants फैसलाबाद यूनिवर्सिटी से, so वो अगर कुछ क्वेश्चन अगर करना चाहें तो they are most welcome, जी. And जी तौहीद साहब.
Hello.
नहीं चटर साहब, आपके पास इस वक्त इस हॉल में सिर्फ अगर एक ही जो वो है ना लैपटॉप, उसी को आप सिर्फ ऑन रखें तो वो फिर इको नहीं आएगी. तो काफी ज्यादा इको आ रही है.